While colleges grapple with how to evaluate applicants, financially disadvantaged students are struggling to figure out how to even afford college in a devastated economy. That struggle is reflected in the numbers from a recent report that shows undergrad enrollment dropped by 3.6% this year, continuing a larger downward trend, particularly among black students. Joining us now with more are Jeffery Beckham Jr., interim CEO of Chicago Scholars Foundation, a college access and development program for students from under-resourced communities, and Kyle Westbrook, Executive Director of Partnership for College Completion, which works to ensure students in the Chicago area graduate from college. Gentlemen, welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, and thanks for joining us. Jeffery, let's start with you, please. What are you hearing from students and families about this year's college application process?
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. So we're hearing that, our students who are first generation and from low-income communities know that this has always been a challenge. That's why Chicago Scholars exists. We're trying to support these students to get through college and to graduate and become leaders in their professional lives. The dual pandemics of both the COVID-19 pandemic and systematic racism in the city has led to students having what has already been a challenging process to even be that much more challenging. And so, even in a year where everything has been different, our students are still working and committed to achieving and persevering.
Kyle, what are some of the changes that colleges and universities are making with regard to their admissions requirements because of COVID, particularly around standardized testing?
Sure. Even before the pandemic, there was a growing movement of colleges and universities around the country and here in Illinois who were going to what is called either test optional or test blind admissions. And that is in test optional institutions, you have colleges who are saying students can submit those tests, but they're not required to. And then increasingly at places like Northern Illinois University, Southern Illinois University of Carbondale, those institutions have actually gone test blind. And that is, they don't even want to see those tests because we know all the research suggests that those tests don't actually predict much about students' ability to be successful in college. But what they really measure is a student's family income more than anything. And so you see increasingly colleges were, even before the pandemic, moving away from those tests. And then now with the pandemic and the fact that ACT, SAT has been suspended and they've tried to have tests, it's been inconsistent all over the country, that you see even more colleges and universities embracing test optional or test blind approaches.
And Jeffery, if college enrollment was already on the decline, what effect might COVID-19 have on enrollment numbers for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, right now, unfortunately, colleges are still trying to figure it out. The enrollment numbers and as well as their budgets are being impacted greatly. So the amount of merit aid, the money going to the students directly, is still very much so up in the air. And that's because of that, we're actually advising our students to look for external scholarships.
And Kyle, are community colleges, might they see an increase as, the typical college experience is likely off the table for a number of students?
Yeah, there's a couple of things at play. Typically, during economic downturns, you do see actual community college enrollment go up. But the National Student Clearinghouse just released data a few weeks ago that said that actually community college enrollment has actually declined the most during the pandemic. And it shouldn't surprise us when we consider that most often community college students are most financially vulnerable, that the most financially vulnerable students would be less likely to enroll in college fresh out or right out of high school.
And Jeffery, how would you describe the effect that we're seeing of all of this on black and brown students particularly? Obviously, Chicago Scholars works with largely black and brown students.
Yeah, definitely. They're being adversely impacted. When you think about the dual pandemics, and I always say this, is that when, the world catches a cold, the black and brown communities catch a flu. And unfortunately, this time it's been COVID-19. Our students have been adversely impacted from the amount of funding that goes to them from a merit perspective. They're not being notified because schools' budgets are cut. And, again, just the ability even to have counsel or individuals to help them test or take the ACT and SAT has largely impacted students, which is why so many of the students weren't able to take it or they didn't do as well on those tests. And so, we're really working with colleges and advising them to look at the whole student, as Kyle mentioned earlier.
And, to that point, Kyle, what changes should admissions changes, what of those should colleges and universities be considering to ensure that Black and brown students aren't further disproportionately impacted?
Yeah, I think the movement towards test optional and test blind, and frankly, we would say test blind admissions needs to be accelerated. And, as Jeffrey mentioned, sort of looking at the whole student, and that includes their GPA, their high school transcript, that includes their extracurricular activities, their service, and in many cases, especially for Black students, they've held down part-time jobs and, and at the same time been able to successfully manage their academic life as well as their work life and their family life. And that should tell a college university a lot about that student's ability to be successful and juggle the multiple priorities that they will experience in college.
We've talked about admissions, but also what about persisting in college, Kyle? What changes should universities be making to ensure that Black and brown students can continue to persist? They may not have sort of a safety net at home.
That's right. The biggest, one of the biggest challenges we see is really the wealth gap that exists between Black students and white students. So it's not necessarily just family income, it's wealth. And that's the ability for family and the student to weather some of the economic crises that might come up. And so what we see and what we are certainly pushing not only our college and universities, but also our legislature, and that is to fund emergency grants on campuses. And knowing that, of course, every dollar is tight these days, but prioritizing these small kind of micro grants that often make the difference between a low-income student's ability to actually persist in college. And it might be something as small as a $400 bill that prevents a student from being able to re-enroll. And so colleges, universities, as well as our state government needs to step up and to really fully fund these types of expenditures for our students.
And Jeffrey, we've got about 30 seconds left, but what do you think should be maintained? Colleges and universities have made some changes in the admissions process because of the pandemic. What do you think will stick around once we return to some sort of normal?
Well, I hope that this move to test optional is something that colleges keep, or like Kyle mentioned earlier. I think that's critically important. It'll be important to increase the amount of equity that exists if we're looking at the whole student. The student that may not do as well taking math at home because at home is a challenge is doing very well in helping take care of their brother and sister in school or other leadership initiatives. And so I hope colleges continue to look at the whole student holistically.
Okay. My thanks to Jeffery Beckham and Kyle Westbrook. Thanks to you both and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.